Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Our current session focuses on Martha's Vineyard. I hope and expect by the end of this session you would be able to understand Martha's study of dialects. Well, my dear students, the first social dialect study was conducted in the summers of 1961 on Martha's Vineyard, an island off the coast of Massachusetts in the northern eastern United States. This is where this particular vineyard is located. Now, who was the person who conducted this study? I hope and expect that you know Lebov, and you know that he was prominent sociolinguist of 1960s who made a lot of contribution towards the studies of dialects. So this American sociolinguist, William Lebov, was the person who conducted this research. His interests include variational sociolinguistics and dialectology. The location, as I've earlier said, for this particular study was Martha's Vineyard. It is a small island. This is the name of a small island off the northeast coast of America. So, as far as this island is concerned, this is more like a resort, resort for vacations, and people would go there and would spend their summers there. So there would be a lot of tourist activity during, summers at this place. So it was more like a summer playground for people who would live most of the year on the mainland of US in the 1960s, and then, during the summers they would come here to spend their vacation. The number thus would increase because there would be a lot of tourists who would come during the summers. So during the summers, the number of the inhabitants would increase, the residents would increase, and it would be almost 7 times more than the regular inhabitants. At that time, when the study was conducted, the population was approximately 5,800 on this island. During the summer months, however, the figure would swell, as I said, because of the tourists. So it was a popular holiday resort where, almost 60,000, compare this 5,800 with 60,000, even more than 10 times the population would increase. Now, there were these huge discrepancies, in terms of what are the normal circumstances during the rest of the year and what are the circumstances during the summers. Because there would be people who would be all year rounders who would live here for the whole year, and then there would be majority of people who would just come here for a very short time in summers. The socioeconomic factors related to that was that the cost of housing was very expensive because it was a tourist resort. So it was in 1961 that William Lebov also visited here as a summer visitor, and as a student of Uriel Wenrichs at Columbia University, he was already acquainted with Wenrich's work on language and dialect contact, so he was interested in that already. He was also interested in the relationship between different linguistic variants and the social factors, how they affect it. And in fact, it was this interest of Lebov that laid the foundations of modern sociolinguistics. Pronunciation of certain key vocabulary, key variables of Martha's Vineyard differs markedly from the neighboring parts of the mainland, and this is what interested Lebov to do some study here. Now comes the question, what was his research method? In fact, during this study on Martha's Vineyard, he interviewed 69 people, each from different age, ethnic, and social group, as to get a representative sample of the whole island. Now, rather than getting his informants to read some word lists, Lebov used a method that was interview-based technique, and actually how the interview was conducted. During the interview, he would subtly, encourage participants to say certain words containing vowels in them. And actually the purpose of the study was, by the way, to study the vowel sounds and their variation in different parts of the island, in different groups and in, one individual in different situations. But he would not directly give them a list of, like other dialectologists, giving a list and asking them to pronounce them. Rather, he would just talk to them in an interview mode, and he would talk in such a way tactfully that he would encourage them to use certain vowels. By using this research, Lebov tried to avoid demand characteristics and make this conversation as natural as possible. And, because he did not want the participants to realize what exactly Lebov was looking for, so that the data is, not manipulated. So he made certain example questions for his interviews. For example, when we speak the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, what does right mean? Is it in writing? So, when the people would answer this question, how would they use certain vowels? He would just take records of that. Another question, for example, if a man is successful at a job he doesn't like, would you still say he was a successful man? So, apparently this question that he would ask, people would be focused on the contents. What does it mean to be a successful man or not to be a successful man? But actually, Lebov was not looking at the answer in terms of contents. He was rather looking at the answer in terms of the use of vowels. So this is how tactfully he collected all the data. So these kinds of questions subconsciously urge the participants to use words which contained the desired vowels, such as life, might, right, etc. And what did he find out, by the way, through his study? Pronunciation of certain vowel sounds were subtly changing from the standard American pronunciations. This was one of his major findings. Locals had a tendency to pronounce these diphthongs with a more central point. So some of the findings that he had during that study were like this. For example, fishermen. So, his study focused on how different social and economic classes within the society in different situations pronounced different vowels and different sets of vowels as diphthongs in different ways. So, for example, what he found was fishermen centralized ow sound and I sound more than any other occupational group. Now, what was the reason? This was done subconsciously to establish and identify themselves as vineyarders. They were not the summer visitors. This was more like creating an identity. An identity as independent social group, rejecting the norms of mainland America, which was brought over by the summer holiday visitors. So this was a line that would be drawn through identity marker of choosing these vowels being pronounced in certain ways to differentiate themselves as the local people from the visitors who come in summers. Another finding was that Up Islanders use the centralized diphthongs more than people living in the area of Down Island. Now, according to Lebov, what was the reason for that? Down Island, that is the east, was much more densely populated and favored by summer visitors. In the Down Island, the visits of the summer visitors, the tourists, would be more, whilst Up Island, that is the west, had many more original inhabitants and was thus much more rural, because the tourists who would come, of course, they would be more urbanized as compared to the local population who would have more kind of rural orientations. So there seems to be enough evidence to state that generations, occupations, or social groups might be a big factor in language use as a sociolinguistic consideration. And I think this was a great contribution of the study of Martha's Vineyard.